But if he gets them, you know.
Okay.
Oh,
You know,
no.
We wouldn't want
I have
that.
no clue what you guys are counting on. I'm gonna sit over here.
Kathy's texting me, giving me grief about the cameras, you're not even here.
It's on now. They're in Texas.
Oh,
They're in
great.
Austin.
Your dad's.
We're gonna do more here.
So I guess you'll just follow
Oh,
Melinda
no,
then.
whoever, I'm just gonna sing Silent Night with the kids. Whoever does the children's moments and would do putting the ornaments on the tree, they're in that little box. That has Santa Claus on it.
Okay, I mean, it doesn't, if you want to do that, that's fine, it doesn't matter.
I think it would flow better if whoever
Okay.
is gonna do that does that.
All right.
They're cute.
So
Anyway, you passed with flying colors.
you want to
Still,
do that at the end of your time after you do.
You know, we gotta
have the
check
kids put those on the tree.
that's what I'm trying to tell
Then
you.
Debbie's just gonna leave the kids inside tonight.
Cancer, I
With
tell lots
the
of
guitars
people
and
about
stuff.
that. It's amazing. It's an amazing power.
Trish? She's actually out of town. She went home tonight.
Kathy says she sees this.
Huh?
Kathy says she sees this.
Ah.
It's a little bit of a delay.
So, we're gonna take a look at the Tower of Babel this morning, in Rob's, in Bible studies. So I don't know if anybody found out anything really,
You're doing your pockets. You're rattling your change.
I don't know if anybody found out anything really interesting or not. Rob starts out talking about, in Genesis, the Genesis 11, where we read about the people who decide they're gonna build a tower that reaches to heaven. And they do that, they say, so that we can make a name for ourselves and not be scattered over the face of the whole earth. So part of that comes out of the fact that this is like after the flood. And so Noah and his family start, getting busy and repopulating the earth, as it were, if you take a look at that literally or whatever. But as people began to be born and stuff like that, people began to scatter around in various places around their known world anyway. And these people didn't want to be scattered. These people wanted to they wanted to sort of make a name for themselves, and they wanted to kind of be remembered. We watched a movie last night, The Snowman, it's called. And this little guy, that was his big desire in life, is he wanted to be remembered for something, for a really long time. And some important thing, yeah. And in his little mind, he figured that had to be something like would get him in the Guinness Book of World Records or something, so that people would remember him forever for a really long time for something important. And that's kind of what these folks wanted. Apparently, they wanted something important to be remembered by. So they were going to build this tower to heaven. But the scripture tells us that God comes and looks at what they're doing or inspects what they're doing. And God decides, it says, that if they can do this, they can do most anything that they put their mind to, that nothing would be impossible for them. If they could build a tower to reach to heaven or to the middle of the sky or whatever, that they could do anything that they wanted to do. So the scripture says that God decides, and then Rob quotes the scripture, "Come, let us go down and confuse their languages, so they will not understand each other."
Can I interrupt for a minute?
Yeah.
Kathy and Scott are watching us, if we want to say hi.
Hello.
Hi, Scott and Kathy.
She says hi.
Oh. Yeah, she said they were gonna try to watch. So yeah, continue watching, because we're gonna do the worship service too, and you can listen to all the music. So Rob says, he says, "I assume by now that you approach a story like this looking for details, hints, anything to help you better understand what was going on at the time in history, so that you can answer those compelling questions that you'd ask about anything else in the Bible. Like, why would people find this story important and worth passing on?" And he said, "I'm glad you asked." So then he talks a little bit about who built Babel. And he talks about Nimrod, who was this character in Genesis, actually started in chapter 10, the chapter before us, who became a mighty warrior on the earth, the scripture tells us. He was a mighty hunter before the Lord. And Rob reminds us that the first centers of the kingdom were Babylonia, or Babylon, which was also known as Babel. And he said, what else do we know about Nimrod besides being the best Green Day album ever? And I don't know who Green Day is, but somebody must know who Green Day is. And apparently Nimrod was, yeah, I didn't get it, but I knew somebody must have, or he wouldn't put it in there. But he says the name Nimrod comes from the Hebrew word meaning rebel or rebel, depending upon which way you read that, whether it's the noun or the verb. But it means rebel or rebel. And he says this matters because by the time you get to the story about the Tower of Babel, what we know is that it's being built by a very, very violent and powerful warrior who is also building lots of other cities, and his name is connected with the idea of rebelling. This is called empire building. It's what happens when someone or a group of people use military might or economic dominance to crush anything and anyone in the way of their plans. And then he says, are there any other details we missed in the earlier reading of the story? So he kind of sets this up that's empire building is what he calls it. And later on, he talks a little bit about empire building, and we certainly see what looks like empire building kind of going on in our world today in various places. He even mentions later on that the towers that we sometimes build comes in all sort of shapes and sizes and around various kinds of things. So it's interesting. But we certainly have empire building going on today. Any thoughts or ideas at this point, or anybody?
I think, my mind, of course, goes to the better bricks today is our nuclear power and so forth, and too bad God hasn't done something about that. And it was okay when the wonderful, great United States had all the technology and nobody else would, but now it's like the bricks.
Mhm.
The bricks are all over the place. You can't even keep track of it.
Yeah.
And it's a very scary situation.
And that's one of the things that he talks about. And Melinda and I were talking about that. It seems like when you read the Old Testament stories, and I know we have to figure that part of that is their understanding of the way the world worked at that time. But it just seemed like God used to be more involved in things. Just like this story, it says that God came down and inspected what they were doing and said, let's go down and confuse their languages. And somehow God did that. So at various places in the Old Testament, we see them, at least in their mind, God is involving God's self, in their sort of day to day. And we don't see a lot of that today. It doesn't seem like, anyway, that God is.
They expected it, though. God was so powerful, and He was in everyday things, and so every time something came up, they looked for what God was doing
Right.
in the midst of it. And we don't. We're too smart for that. So.
Isn't it kind of like when you're a parent raising a child, you're very involved in their lives as their little baby children, and less involved as they grow up. Well, mankind was much younger then,
Okay.
and their understanding of God was much younger and stuff. And
Okay.
so maybe God was more involved like He is with like we are as parents with little children.
It's interesting. That's an interesting.
I was going to say, like you and I talked about, it could be too that, gods with the little g were very important to those primitive people. And so when something happens, you think that it was caused by a god who was unhappy with you or flourished and prospered with you. And so, like you said, it was kind of expected. Some god or another did this to either warn you or praise you or doing something.
Okay.
So the idea, I don't think was foreign,
Okay.
that some kind of a God was
Involved.
involved.
Okay.
They didn't have scientists in those days to tell us what an earthquake was.
No, that's true. That's true. And like Melinda said, in fact, next week's lesson it really talks a lot about how people were trying to understand God in their day. So Rose mentioned this. So Rob goes on to say that that one of the other interesting things about this story is how they were building the tower. And the text reads, "They said to each other, 'Come, let us make bricks and bake them thoroughly.' They used bricks instead of stone and tar for mortar." He said these details are huge. They used bricks instead of stone. Have you ever tried to build something tall out of stone? It's next to impossible. Why? Because stones are different shapes and sizes, and they're hard to stack on top of each other. Total hassle. Melinda and I tried for a couple of years to build a little wall at the front of our house in Bailey, where the deck ends, for those of you that have been up there, where the deck ends, and then the ground drops out pretty significantly, and we wanted to build a stone wall up to kind of hide that void under the deck a little bit. And it's only, on the one end, it's only 4 feet tall. On the other end, it goes to nothing because of the way the ground slopes uphill. But on the one end, it's about 4 feet tall. And we tried for a couple of years to build that rock wall. So it would stand up there and hold the dirt back, and it fell down 2 or 3 times, and we finally got discouraged and said, heck with it, it's not going to work. And so we quit for a little while, and we just had this pile of rubble down there. And then one day, Melinda got this great idea about a way that we could try to stabilize that wall. And we did that. And so today we do have about a 4-foot rock wall. But I certainly wouldn't want to try to go up much higher than that. And so what he's talking about is if you've ever built anything out of just stones, or even stones in some sense of sticking them together, it's pretty difficult. But all of a sudden, somehow these people invented on their own, or they discovered, or they figured out how to make bricks. And bricks, he says, you can make the same size, the same shape. You can make them the exact specification you want for whatever you're trying to build. And if you read the scriptures, and if you read some of the other literature about it, there were some specific sizes on these bricks, that they were 3 times as long as they were tall, and various things like that. So I don't know, how they know all that. There's a lot of extra biblical literature that talks about some of those things. Josephus and some other folks talked about some of the mechanics of it, where the scriptures didn't necessarily talk about the size of the bricks.
Russia had the same problem with their wall too.
Okay.
I've been on both sides of that.
Both sides of that one, yeah, yeah. So he says that, when they started talking about these bricks being amazing things, they make all kinds of building possible that wasn't possible before. And then the question is just how big could you make something with these new bricks? And he also talked about the fact that it wasn't just bricks, but the scripture in Genesis really talks about the fact that they were also using tar as mortar. So not only did we have the bricks, but they weren't just dry stacking the bricks on top of each other like you might a stone wall. They were actually using tar as a mortar to hold the bricks together. So now you've added a whole another element to the idea of building brick walls. And so what he says is that another name for these details about bricks and mortar is technology. He said all of a sudden these people have, among other things, technology. Somebody invented something new, which was bricks and mortar, which allowed people to make and do things that they hadn't been able to do before. And then he goes back and asks the question about Nimrod, and he said this is a story about what happens when a powerful warrior who's building an empire gets his hands on new technology and begins to use it to set himself up as a god, small g, crushing everybody and everything in his path. And what does that tell us about the world that the author was living in? So this is when he's talking about, Rose, what you were talking a little bit about, this idea that people were spreading and scattering all over the place. Some of them were gaining more and more power and influence, and that began to affect everybody else. And he says whenever you hear someone say that corporations and banks on Wall Street have gotten too powerful, you're hearing echoes of the same sentiment thousands of years later. And, you know, we've all heard that and talked about that, the whole too big to fail thing, and the banks and Wall Street itself has gotten big and powerful. Some people are saying that about government, that government has gotten big and powerful, and we don't want to turn this into a political debate, besides Scott and Rose aren't here to argue with each other, but but this idea that Nimrod was able to use this technology to make something big, and so he says, if you've been building walls out of stones all of your life, and then you go to Babel and you see people working on a tower made of bricks, it might be awe-inspiring, but we can also assume it would have been terrifying. If somebody can do that, what else can they do? Or to put more of an edge on it, what couldn't they do? And then he talks a little bit about if a country, if other countries have nuclear bombs and your country doesn't, imagine what it would be like to not have nuclear bombs or the potential to defend yourself or whatever. And not only that, but to know that those countries do have nuclear bombs and actually use the nuclear bombs in recent history, dropping those bombs on actual cities that people lived in. I think what he's saying is the reason this story had, go ahead.
And to bring things even more up to date, this thing that's happened with Sony Pictures, and it looks like to me, and Bill, any of you probably could know more about this than I do, you could bring a country down financially and in a lot of other ways with this technology. But I always get North and South Korea, the baddies are the North ones.
Yeah, right.
They are in good stead with this one because their technology isn't out there in space like the rest of us have done. I mean, they're doing it so it's not so, well, you know more than I do. So it looks like to me that they could be the winners on, if they can hack into Sony, could they hack into our government and tear down our financial institutions, do all this kind of stuff. But and Obama said he was going to pay back in like kind, but they're having a hard time with that.
Yeah.
Because they're not out in space.
Yeah.
With that technology the way we are.
You know, the terrorists that are down into the Cuba, in that prison down there, the newspaper guys were down there interviewing them. And one of the terrorists told the newspaper guys that the reason that they hit the Twin Towers was to show the Americans that they had the wrong God. They were, because the Muslims think they're the ones that they've got the right guy.
Right.
That was why they did that, was to show them they were looking at the wrong God.
Right. Yeah, and that's, that's a little bit what this story is about, because Nimrod was this kind of guy that was a very persuasive and charismatic leader, and was basically turning people against God, if you read the scripture about it.
Well, it's a little confusing because when they're talking about him, they're talking like he was favored of God, that he was a great warrior in God's sight. So that's kind of confusing there.
Well, I think that's how he started out, but then I think he turned away from that. I think he began to see himself as more, at least that's what Rob sort of intimates, is that he began to see himself as more powerful than God, and began to, his ego got in the way, and he began to say that, we don't need to rely on this God, that makes us weak, and if we're going to be really strong, we don't need to rely on him. At least that's what, I did look at a couple other places this morning online, and that was a couple of things that they said, was that Nimrod began to let his own ego get in the way and began to lure people away from God.
So is this why maybe God scattered them and changed their language? So they couldn't understand Nimrod?
Well,
and
that's,
Nimrod couldn't have any power over them to lure them away from God?
yeah, that's what the scripture, that's what Rob talks about, is what happened was that because God didn't want, you know, what, one of the articles that I read said that God had figured out, again, these are folks that take the scriptures pretty literally, but they had said that God had figured out that the flood and that devastation didn't change people's minds any. They were just as sinful after that as they were before. So it wasn't going to do any good to destroy them again that way. And so it's exactly what you said, Debbie, that when God came down, and the scripture says, let us go down and confound their languages so that they can't talk to each other. And the scriptures talk about, in other places, talk about that out of that came 72 different languages that came out of that Tower of Babel experience. But you're right, then the people couldn't, they couldn't build the tower if they couldn't talk to each other. If they couldn't speak the same language, they weren't going to be able to continue building this tower that was supposedly going to reach up into the heavens and ultimately reach up to where God was. But you're right, it is, I mean, there is a sense in which he talks about nuclear bombs. Obviously, he made this Bible study a couple of years ago in 2013. But today, like you were talking about, the technology of the computer and the ability to hack into other computer systems like Sony or like another government or whatever, those are terrifying things, especially if you don't have the potential to stop it. And apparently, even with all of the technology that we've got with can't think of the word I want.
Malware, virus.
Yeah, right, malware and antivirus software and all that stuff, it doesn't seem to be enough in some ways to
Never enough.
to do, yeah, you're always sort of one step behind the bad guys in a way. Did you have a?
Oh, and I was going to say that we're sometimes when we read these stories, we're tending to take them literally, but if we look at them at the big picture, what the scriptures are trying to tell us is that the power of putting yourself above other people and that's the problem.
Right.
And we see that all the way through biblical history and,
Right.
and our own history.
Right, yeah. But,
I was wondering if the wall you was building kept falling down because you and Melinda speak different languages.
oh, well,
That could be.
we do speak different languages.
I have a problem with mine.
Yes, we have found that out. She and I definitely sometimes have different definitions for the same term or whatever. But this was just, like he was talking about, the whole idea of the shape of the rocks and everything. It was a fun challenge, but she had a great idea, so. But anyway, he's talking about, so he says exactly what you said at the end, Love, and that is, perhaps the real power of the story is the haunting warning it brings that when we make it all about ourselves and our accumulation and our ego and our power and our desire to rule, when we become too full of ourselves, too obsessed with our own importance, too fixated on elevating ourselves to the top of the tower we're building, and we know that towers come in all shapes and sizes, that God, or whatever word you have for it, has endless, clever, and unexpected ways of scrambling our efforts, thwarting our plans, and sometimes even confusing our language so that we babble.
Can we bring that down from nation to nation to what is happening in the United States that is terrifying again to me, that there are the very, 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 very rich, and then there's the rest of us. And the very, 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 I mean, I hate to pick on anybody, but the Koch brothers, they use their money to influence the rest of us to keep them in power and to build up whatever they're trying to build up. And
Yeah, no, I think that's a very real comparison. I think we do have people that live in our own, like you said, that live in our own country that are continuing to amass wealth, and with wealth, power. Wealth seems to be able to buy power in some pretty unsettling ways. And yes, they keep seeming to build their empires, as it were, bigger and bigger and bigger. Of course, the sad thing is there's not, I mean, the answers to that are answers that at this point, those folks don't have any interest in listening to. Just like Nimrod didn't really have any interest in listening to the answer to that either. The answers were to go back, to God and to following God's rule of sharing and justice and peace and those kinds of things. And unfortunately, it seems like from the outside looking in that the folks that are amassing that kind of wealth and that kind of empire building aren't really interested in listening to somebody else's version of God either. They sort of have their own version of
Well, wasn't one of the end results to become as God? There was a reason that they were building the tower, and I think there's got to be an end result and it's not just the Koch brothers. That's the millionaire,
Right.
billionaire I happen to know, and I know you understand that. But they're going to live and die just like you and I are.
Right.
But is the end result, they've got to have an end result. What is it? To be as God while they're still alive?
Well,
I mean, I lose track of, I can't even fathom
right.
what it is they're wanting.
Yeah, I agree. I don't know that there's even an answer for that question. If you ask them, I mean, somebody said one time, how much is enough? Just a little bit more than I have, so I don't know that there's an answer for that necessarily. And it does, I can see how we would feel as powerless in some ways to have any impact on that as these folks might have felt watching Nimrod and those people build their tower. They might have felt powerless to stop that in a lot of ways.
It says in here that their purpose was to build a monument to our greatness.
Yeah,
That's what they were going to do.
yeah, and that would certainly fit some of the folks you're talking about, a monument to our greatness.
But we have the power too, that they don't, and they can tap into it, and this is love, joy, peace, hope. I think that's the only thing that makes sense to me.
Right.
And I think we all need to feel somehow that we've got a little bit of power, and I think that's got to be
Right.
it.
Yeah, and I think, I agree. And how can we, I guess the thing of it is that we may be powerless on a world scale, but we may be able to make a difference, in the areas that we have impact on. And
Well, I guess if you would look at, we have the power with our vote, but how many people really vote when you only have 25% or 30% of the people that are eligible to vote that actually do vote.
right.
And so we're squandering that power by not using that, and the poor and the.
I think the answer is never to squander the power of love and what it can do. That's what we've got.
Yeah. No, I agree.
And then never to count it out that it can only be just right here. I think the power of love it's powerful enough if we use it.
Well, that was one of the other things that happened in this movie that we saw about snowmen. Was in the very end. It was the power of love that changed the whole situation that this little guy was involved in, and made his little community better, because of it. So yeah, I agree with you. I think there is power in love. I don't know. I don't know how much we can really impact, the world for that though.
How much did Jesus impact? Wasn't his birth just
Well,
the birth of love?
yeah, that's true.
And one person.
Yeah, no, that's true.
But I think if you look at what has become of, if you want to call it religion or whatever, it's also caused a lot of division. This book and a lot of other
Right.
things has also caused a lot of division about what loving really means.
Right. Yeah, no, I agree with that too. And that, and we even have that happening in churches where churches are building monuments to themselves in some ways, not the buildings that they're living in, but their ideology, their theology. They're building, so that's what their tower looks like. Their tower today is inerrancy and those kinds of things. Is a tower that's being built to to what they see as a tower to lead them closer to God, but I don't know. It's interesting. So let's quit a little bit early this morning and have some fellowship now, and then let's be back up here about 10 till at the latest, because we'll start worship about 10 till 11, so we can get in all the great music and stuff that we've got going on today.
I just did want to point out,
Go ahead.
here, that everything that everybody thinks about the politics and like the Koch brothers, we can't do anything just as, because only a certain amount of people are going to vote and stuff. But instead of building towers here, just as a personal person, I can't build like a big tower or monument to, what I feel and how I love, but I can sure build a lot of little snowmen.
Yeah.
And here we can all build a whole lot of little snowmen, and we can impact our little place of the earth. Can't fix it all, but we can impact.
Yeah, and I think that's really where we have the potential to make a difference, is in our families and in our communities and in those places that we can interact, where we see that kind of injustice and people getting bad ideas and stuff like that. Speaking up and making a difference in that way. And like you said, it may not impact the Koch brothers ever or anybody on that scale, but who knows how you might impact your next door neighbor or the person that comes into your store or the person that you work with or whatever. So I think, like Rose said, we don't ever want to discount the power of love to make a difference in somebody's life. So, yeah. All right, next week we're going to look at Abraham and Isaac, the son. That's an interesting chapter in itself. There'll be a lot of discussion, I think, on that one. So we'll take a look at that next week.
Get into some more history.
Yes, some more history. All right, back up here a little bit.
Not in the prisons.
Stop broadcast.
Huh?
Will we stop the broadcast?
It won't hurt anything. We can just let it go and
How are we gonna get back to our?
I don't think it has to be on there to be broadcasting. I don't think. So I think you can
Back out.
we can still leave it on, but we'll put this worship on the screen, right? Right.
Yeah. I felt so good. I didn't.
So we could probably minimize that. Go up and.
Where's the arrow at?
Go ahead and end the broadcast and then start it again. if you
Oh,
want,
okay.
and that way
Okay.
They'll save.
Sorry, sweetie.
Here's the song that we need.
Okay.